The gavel struck like thunder. Bang, bang. The sound echoed through the wood-paneled chamber, cutting through the restless whispers of a packed courtroom. Every seat was taken. Journalists hunched forward, pens ready. Families of the accused and the victims sat in tense clusters, their eyes sharp, their breaths shallow. The air felt heavy, thick with judgment and curiosity. It was the kind of silence that vibrated in the chest, as though the whole world was holding its breath. At the very center, the young girl sat beside her father. She was no more than 16, yet her back was straight, her chin trembling as she tried to steady her breath. Her hands, small and nervous, gripped the edge of the wooden bench until her knuckles turned white. Her father, once a proud man, a respected man, sat shackled beside her, his face weary but calm. He didn't look at her, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't bear the pain in her eyes. His gaze stayed low, locked on the polished floorboards as though answers might rise from them. The prosecutor's voice cut through the silence. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, the evidence will prove without question that this man is guilty of the crimes he stands accused of. He stolely betrayed. He destroyed the trust of those who believed in him. And today, justice must be served. Every word landed like a hammer, designed to wound. The jury shifted in their seats, some nodding, some frowning, while the father sat motionless, silent, waiting for the storm to pass. And then, it happened. The girl rose. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, startling even the bailiff. All eyes turned to her, those of strangers, reporters, lawyers, and even the cold gaze of the judge. She trembled, her knees weak, but her voice carried a force no one expected. "My father is innocent?" Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Some laughed under their breath, others whispered to their neighbors. Cameras clicked rapidly, the shutters snapping like applause to her defiance. The judge's gavel slammed again. Bang! Order in the court. Sit down immediately. But she didn't sit. She raised her chin, tears stinging the corners of her eyes, and repeated, louder this time, "My father did not do what you say. He is not the man you're painting him to be." The words came not from a place of defiance, but from a place of love so fierce, it cut through the courtroom's heavy air. Her father turned at last, his eyes glistening, his lips parting as though to speak, but he couldn't. Pride and fear wrestled in his chest. He wanted to protect her, to tell her to stop before she got herself into trouble. But deep down, he knew there was no stopping her now. The prosecutor smirked. "Your Honor, this outburst is inappropriate. The child has no place interrupting these proceedings." But the girl didn't falter. Her fists clenched, her voice shaking but steady. "No, I do have a place, because the truth matters, and the truth is, my father has been framed." The courtroom froze. The jury's pens stopped scratching. The audience held its breath. Even the judge, stern and seasoned by years of trials, leaned forward, ever so slightly. The silence stretched, thick and unbroken, as though the walls themselves were listening. For a brief moment, time seemed suspended, every gaze pinned on the trembling figure of the girl who dared to defy them all. Her voice quivered as she whispered, barely above a breath, yet it rang out clear, "And I will prove it." The judge exhaled slowly, the weight of her words hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. The gavel rested in his hand, but for once, he didn't strike it. Instead, he studied her, perhaps sensing something the others missed, something raw, something real. Around the room, the murmurs began again. "Did you hear that? She says she can prove it. Is this some kind of stunt?" But no one laughed now. No one dismissed her. Even the prosecutor, lips tight, shifted uncomfortably. Because when a voice carries truth, even a trembling one, it cuts sharper than the sharpest blade. The girl, still standing, felt her legs wobble, but she refused to sit down. She wouldn't let her father carry this weight alone. Not anymore. Her heart pounded. Her palms burned. And yet, deep within her, a fire had been lit. A fire that would not go out until justice was done. The judge finally leaned back in his chair, tapping the gavel lightly, not to silence her, but to regain control. "This court," he said firmly, "will proceed in order. But let it be known, her words are now on record." And with that, the chapter closed, not with an answer, not with a verdict, but with a question burning in every mind present. What proof does this girl have? And what truth is about to come to light? The silence lingered, heavy and unyielding, as the trial pressed forward. Before the courtroom, before the gavel, before her trembling cry of defiance, there was a different life, a life that felt safe, ordinary, and filled with love. The girl remembered it vividly, like a dream she could never return to. Her father was her anchor. Every morning, before the sun crept over the rooftops, he would rise, lace up his boots, and head to work with a thermos of coffee in hand. He was a man who believed in sweat, in effort, in building something with his own two hands. To her, he wasn't just a provider, he was a hero. Neighbors greeted him with smiles. Shopkeepers called out his name. Children waved as he passed. He had earned the respect of the community through honesty and kindness, the sort of man people trusted without question. And for his daughter, that trust was everything. She would run to the door when he came home, arms wide, schoolbooks tossed aside just to feel the warmth of his embrace. "Daddy," she'd call, and he'd lift her high into the air. spinning her until laughter filled the living room. They weren't rich. They didn't live in a grand house. But what they lacked in wealth, they made up for in love. Nights were spent around the kitchen table, with her father telling stories from his youth, some funny, some painful, but all carrying lessons she tucked deep into her heart. He would say, "Truth is the one thing no one can steal from you. Guard it, even when the world doesn't believe you." At the time, she thought it was just another one of his sayings. She never knew how much it would one day mean, but happiness, as she would soon learn, is fragile. It happened on a night like any other. The family had finished dinner, the dishes stacked neatly in the sink. She was curled up on the couch, homework spread across her lap, while her father sat in his favorite chair, reading the paper. The world outside seemed quiet, peaceful. Then, bang, bang bang. The front door shook under the pounding of fists. "Police, open up!" Her heart jumped to her throat. Her mother froze. Her father stood, confusion etched across his face. Before he could reach the door, it burst open, hinges groaning as armed officers stormed inside. "Hands where we can see them. Don't move." Chaos erupted. Shouts filled the air. Flashlights cut through the room. She screamed, clutching her mother's hand. As two officers grabbed her father, twisting his arms behind his back, the sound of metal cuffs snapping shut echoed louder than thunder in her ears. "Wait, what's happening?" Her mother cried. "This must be a mistake." Her father pleaded, his voice steady but urgent. "I haven't done anything." But no one listened. The girl stumbled forward, tears blurring her vision. "Daddy," she cried, her voice breaking. She reached out, but an officer pushed her back. The coldness in his eyes burned into her memory. "Stay back, kid." She would never forget the image. Her father, the man who had always stood tall, forced to his knees on their living room floor. His wrists bound, his face pale, but calm for her sake. Even as fear churned in his eyes. The neighbors gathered outside, whispers spreading like wildfire. Camera flashes lit up the night as news vans pulled in, and as her father was dragged away, she felt the world tilt, collapse. Shattered. Her mother sobbed, holding her close, but the girl barely heard. Her ears rang with her father's voice, calling out as they pushed him toward the car. "Stay strong, baby. Remember what I told you. Remember the truth." Then the door slammed. The sirens wailed, and just like that, he was gone. The days that followed blurred together. Their home was no longer a home, but a hollow shell filled with silence and questions no one could answer. Reporters hounded them, cameras thrust into their faces. Headlines, screaming accusations, respected worker accused of fraud, community, hero caught in scandal. Her classmates whispered behind her back at school. Some avoided her, others mocked her. She walked the halls with her head down, carrying the weight of shame that wasn't hers to bear. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to her mother's muffled sobs in the next room. The world that had once felt safe was now a battlefield. Trust had turned to suspicion, laughter to silence, and yet through it all she clung to her father's words. "Truth is the one thing no one can steal from you." She repeated it to herself like a prayer, like a shield, because deep in her heart, she knew no matter what the papers said, no matter what the neighbors believed, her father was not the man they painted him to be. The night of his arrest was the night her childhood ended, the night she realized the world wasn't fair, that innocence could be broken, trust betrayed, and justice twisted. But it was also the night something else was born within her, a fire, a determination, a vow. She would not let her father be buried by lies. She would not stand by while the world condemned him. And though she was just a girl, fragile in years, her heart carried the strength of something far greater. Far in the shadow of loss, she made a silent promise. "One day, I will prove the truth. One day, I will bring him back." Accusations spread faster than truth. One morning, the family woke to a world that no longer looked at them with kindness, but with suspicion. The father's face was splashed across newspapers and glowing from television screens. Company treasurer, charged with massive fraud. Community figures secretly stole millions. The headlines screamed louder than his pleas of innocence ever could. The girl sat in front of the TV, her hands trembling as she clutched the remote. Each anchor's voice carried venom, painting her father as a thief, a liar, a man who betrayed his own company. And each word felt like another stone thrown at her family. Her mother turned the television off, but the silence was no comfort. "They don't know him," she whispered, almost to herself. "They don't know the man I married." But outside, the damage was already done. Neighbors who once waved, now closed their doors. Friends who used to share meals, avoided eye contact. At the grocery store, whispers trailed behind them. "That's his wife, that's the daughter." Can you believe it? All this time, the girl kept her head low, gripping the cart so tightly her hands ached. She felt the stares burn into her back. Shame that wasn't hers wrapped around her like a chain. School was no refuge. If anything, it was worse. When she walked into class, the chatter quieted. A boy muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, "Don't cheat off her paper." She probably learned it from her dad. Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. She bit her lip until it bled, refusing to let them see her cry. But the hurt lodged deep, deeper than she could hide. And at home, the strain grew heavier. Bills piled up as her mother struggled to keep the household afloat. Letters from lawyers arrived daily, filled with words too complicated for her to understand but heavy with consequence. The father, once strong, once admired, sat in silence during visiting hours, separated by glass. His eyes weary but soft when they landed on her. "Beatty," he said one afternoon, voice muffled through the phone, "don't let them make you believe the lies. You know who I am." "I know, Daddy," she whispered back, her small palm pressed to the glass, trying to bridge the distance. "I'll never believe them." But outside the walls of the prison, believing wasn't enough. The company wasted no time releasing statements. They spoke of betrayal, of trust broken, of an employee who robbed the very foundation that supported him. The narrative was clear. Her father was guilty in their eyes. Long before the trial began, reporters swarmed the house, cameras flashing as soon as they stepped outside. "Do you believe your husband is innocent?" they shouted at her mother. "Is it true he used the money to support you? Did you know about the fraud?" Her mother clutched her tightly, shielding her face from the blinding lights. "No comment," she muttered again and again, but the questions kept coming, sharp as knives. Inside, the girl's anger grew. She wanted to scream at them, to tell them they were wrong. She wanted to rip the headlines apart, to silence the gossip. But she was only a child, powerless against the tidal wave of judgment crashing over her family. And slowly, the weight of accusation began to press down on her father's reputation, crushing everything he had built. His years of dedication, his sacrifices, his honesty wiped away in an instant, replaced with one damning label: criminal. The girl overheard a conversation one night, hushed but sharp, between her mother and an uncle who had come to visit. Maybe he really did it," the uncle muttered, his tone heavy with doubt. Her mother's voice cracked. "No, don't you dare say that. He wouldn't, he couldn't. But the evidence can lie." Her mother snapped, "But I know him. I know him." The girl sat at the top of the stairs, knees pulled to her chest, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. If even family was beginning to doubt, what chance did her father have? Still, through the storm, she held on to one unshakable truth: he was innocent. She had seen his heart, his life, his devotion. She knew, and if no one else believed it, she would. But the weight was suffocating. Every corner of her life was tainted by whispers. Every moment, shadowed by judgment. The world had already decided her father was guilty. And as the trial loomed closer, she realized something chilling. If she didn't find a way to fight back, if she didn't hold on to the truth with both hands, then the world's lies would bury him forever. Doubt is a poison. It doesn't strike loudly. It seeps in quiet, invisible till it corrodes the strongest bonds. At first, the girl thought home was the one place untouched by whispers. The world outside may have turned its back, but inside these walls, surely, they all still believed. Surely, they all still trusted her father. But she was wrong. It began with the phone calls. Relatives who once checked in with warmth now spoke cautiously, their voices heavy with suspicion. Are you sure he didn't do it?" one aunt asked over the line. "Sometimes, people hide things even from family." Her mother pressed her lips tight, saying nothing, but the silence was louder than any defense. Then came the visit. A cousin arrived at their door, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. He sat in the living room, his words sharp. "I'm just saying, maybe it's better if you accept it. If you prepare yourself, the evidence is stacked against him." The girl clenched her fists in her lap. She wanted to scream, "You don't know him like I do." But her mother lowered her gaze, her silence again cutting deeper than any accusation. Later that night, the girl cornered her mother in the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound between them. "Why didn't you defend him?" the girl asked, her voice shaking. Her mother's hands trembled as she set a plate into the sink. Because I don't know anymore." The words shattered her. "You don't know," she cried, her voice rising. "You've been with him for years. You've seen the kind of man he is." Tears welled in her mother's eyes. "I've also seen the evidence, the documents, the accounts. What if he really did it? Baby, what if we've been blind?" The girl's chest burned. She slammed her hand against the counter, her small frame trembling with rage. "No, he didn't do it. I know he didn't. How can you even think that?" Her mother turned away, covering her face with her hands. "Because if he did, then everything we built, everything I believed in was a lie." The girl's breath caught. For the first time, she realized her mother wasn't just doubting her father, she was afraid of her own heart breaking in two. But to the daughter, that wasn't an excuse. It was betrayal. She stormed out of the kitchen, her vision blurred with hot tears. For the first time, she felt utterly alone. The one person she thought would always stand with her was wavering. Days passed, but the tension lingered. Mealtime was silent, the air thick with unspoken words. When the girl spoke of her father's innocence, her mother stayed quiet, her eyes distant. One evening, she overheard her mother on the phone again. "I don't know what to believe anymore," her mother whispered. "I want to think he's innocent. But what if the jury's right? What if I've been living beside a stranger all this time?" The girl's heart broke anew. If her own mother couldn't hold on to the truth, then who would? That night, lying in her bed, she stared at the ceiling, her fists gripping the blanket. She replayed her father's words in her mind: "Truth is the one thing no one can steal from you. If even her mother had forgotten those words, then it was up to her to carry them. Alone, if she had to, she whispered into the darkness, her voice soft but fierce. I'll prove it. Daddy, I'll prove you're innocent, Evan, if no one else believes me. The decision settled in her chest like iron. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. If the world was against him, then she would stand as his defender. If doubt had taken root in her family, then she would be the one to uproot it. And as she drifted into restless sleep, one thought pulsed louder than her grief, louder than her mother's silence, louder than the world's accusations. The truth is out there, and I'm going to find it. Some nights demand courage greater than daylight ever could. The girl waited until the house was silent, until her mother's breathing steadied in the next room, until the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left. Then she slipped on her sneakers, clutching a small flashlight in her trembling hand. Her destination was the office where her father had worked for decades. A place now abandoned, locked away, as though his very presence had been erased. She whispered to herself, steadying her nerves, if no one else will search for the truth, then I will. The walk through the empty streets felt endless. Every shadow seemed to stretch. Every distant bark of a dog made her heart skip. But determination carried her forward. At last, she reached the building. The sign out front, once proud, with her father's name among the senior managers, now felt like a cruel joke. She pushed against the glass door, locked, but she had planned for this. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out the spare key her father once gave her, back when she'd visit him after school. She hesitated, staring at it in the dim glow of the streetlight. Then, with a deep breath, she slid it into the lock. The door creaked open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old carpet, like a place forgotten by time. The hallways echoed with her cautious footsteps as she made her way to her father's office. When she opened the door, her chest tightened. Everything looked as though it had been frozen mid-life. Papers still stacked on the desk. A photo of their family framed in the corner. His favorite pen resting beside the computer. For a moment, she stood there, trembling, fighting back tears. I'll clear your name, Daddy, she whispered. Before setting to work, she began with the desk drawer's papers shuffled, receipts, invoices, most of it ordinary. But one drawer was locked. She pulled, tugged, then noticed a small key taped under the desk. Her father had always been careful, always hiding things where only he could find them. With shaky hands, she slid the key into the drawer. It clicked open. Inside were files labeled with dates and account numbers. At first glance, they looked normal, but the more she read, the more her stomach twisted. The numbers didn't add up. Transfers were recorded that her father never mentioned, amounts so large they could ruin any man's career. But one thing stood out. The signature at the bottom of several documents. It looked like her father's. Yet something was off. The strokes were heavier, unnatural, as if forged. She grabbed the papers, holding them close to the light. Her heart raced. They faked this. Someone faked this. She turned to the computer. The screen flickered on, demanding a password. For a moment, panic washed over her. But then she remembered the birthday he never forgot. Hers. She typed it in. The screen unlocked. Her breath caught. Hidden in folders buried beneath layers of ordinary files, she found emails, correspondence between senior executives, words that spoke of covering tracks, shifting blame, making sure the old man takes the fall. Her hands shook as she scrolled. The names of people she had known since childhood flashed before her. Colleagues who once laughed with her father at barbecue. Men and women who had smiled at her, all while plotting to destroy him. She whispered, almost in disbelief. They set him up. They really set him up. Her eyes burned with tears. But this time they weren't just from sorrow, they were from fire. For the first time since the nightmare began, hope flickered. If she could bring these files to light, her father's name could be cleared. Suddenly a noise, the faint creak of footsteps in the hallway. She froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. Someone else was here. Quickly, she closed the folders, snatched the most important papers, and shoved them into her backpack. The computer screen dimmed, plunging the room into near darkness. The footsteps grew louder. Closer, she crouched behind the desk, holding her breath, praying the stranger would pass. A shadow slipped under the doorframe. For one terrifying moment, the knob rattled. Then, silence. The girl waited, muscles tense, until at last, the sound of footsteps faded away. Only then did she allow herself to exhale. Her legs shook as she rose, clutching her backpack tight. She knew she couldn't stay. Whoever had been there might come back, and if they caught her, everything would be lost. She slipped out of the office, her sneakers soft against the carpet, heart pounding as she navigated the dark halls. When she finally reached the door to the street, she ran. She didn't stop until the building was far behind her, its shadow shrinking in the night. By the time she reached home, dawn was beginning to touch the horizon. She collapsed onto her bed, the files spread across the blanket. Exhausted, terrified, yet burning with new resolve. She whispered to herself, I found the truth, and I won't stop until the world sees it. And though she didn't know it yet, this discovery was only the beginning, because hidden within those files were secrets powerful enough to shake not only her father's case, but the entire company to its core. Some battles feel too heavy to fight alone and someone dares to stand beside you. The girl sat in the library, papers spread across the wooden table. Her eyes scanned the files she had stolen from her father's office. Numbers, signatures, and coded language twisted into knots she couldn't untangle. The more she tried, the more the walls seemed to close in. Frustration boiled. She pressed her palms against her forehead. How am I supposed to prove anything? They'll crush me before they ever admit the truth. Just then, a voice interrupted. You shouldn't be looking at those out here. Her head snapped up. Standing across the table was a young man barely in his 20s, nervous, shifting from foot to foot. His tie was loose, his shirt slightly wrinkled, like someone who never quite fit the part he was forced to play. Who are you? She asked, clutching the papers closer. My name's Daniel. I was an intern at your father's company last year. Her eyes narrowed. And what do you want with me? He hesitated, glancing around the room before leaning closer. Because I know what you're holding. And I know you're right. Your father didn't do this. The words landed like thunder. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit. Why should I believe you? Daniel swallowed hard. Because I saw things I shouldn't have. Late-night meetings, executives whispering about moving funds, about needing someone to take the blame. I didn't understand at first, but when the news broke about your dad, everything clicked. The girl's chest tightened. This stranger was confirming what she had only dared to suspect. Then why didn't you speak up? She demanded, her voice sharp with both hope and anger. His eyes dropped to the floor. Because I was scared. I was just an intern. They told me I'd never work in the city again. If I said a word, I needed that job. And I stayed quiet. I'm sorry. The silence between them stretched. She wanted to scream, to tell him his silence had cost her father everything. But instead, she whispered, it's not too late. Help me now. Daniel looked at her, torn. Fear still clung to him, but something else flickered in his eyes, and a longing to make it right. He sat down across from her, lowering his voice. I know how they operate. I saw where they stored backup drives, where they kept duplicates of sensitive files. If we can get to them, we'll have undeniable proof. Her pulse quickened. Where? In the restricted archives of the company's headquarters. They guard it, but I still have a badge that might work. I kept it, just in case. Her mind raced. The idea was dangerous, reckless, but it was also the first real lead she'd had. She leaned in. Then we go. Tonight. Daniel froze. Tonight? Are you serious? Every day my father spends behind bars is another day stolen from him. If you really want to help, prove it now. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a heavy exhale, he nodded. All right, tonight. The hours that followed moved like quicksand. As dusk settled, they met outside the towering glass building where her father had once worked with pride. The company logo glowed above them, a reminder of the betrayal it now symbolized. Daniel pulled his badge from his pocket, his hands shaking. If this doesn't work, we're in trouble. She gripped the straps of her backpack tighter. If it doesn't work, we'll find another way. But we have to try. He swiped the badge. For a second, nothing. Then beep. The lock clicked open. The door swung wide, revealing a shadowed corridor lined with silent offices. They exchanged a glance, then stepped inside. Their footsteps echoed as they moved quickly, guided by Daniel's memory. Every corner felt like a trap, every flicker of light like an alarm. Finally, they reached a heavy steel door marked Archives. Daniel inserted his badge again. Another beep. The lock released. Inside, rows of cabinets and servers filled the room, humming quietly like a beast asleep. The air was cold, sterile. Daniel moved toward a shelf, pulling down a small external drive. This is it. This should hold everything. She clutched it in her hands, a strange mixture of triumph and terror flooding her chest. If this has what we think, it could change everything. But before they could move, a sharp sound cut through the air. The door behind them slammed shut. A voice echoed in the darkness. Well, what do we have here? Her blood turned to ice. They weren't alone. Truth has a price, and sometimes the cost is terrifying. The night after retrieving the hard drive, the girl sat on her bed, staring at her laptop screen. Daniel had left hours ago, promising to cross-check the files. Her heart pounded with cautious hope. Maybe this was the breakthrough her father needed. Maybe tomorrow would bring a chance to prove his innocence. But then ping. A new message popped up on her phone. No contact name, just one chilling line. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. Her breath caught in her throat. She read the words again, her hands trembling. Someone knew. Someone was watching. She rushed to the window, pulling the curtains shut. The night outside suddenly felt alive, as if eyes lurked in every shadow. The next morning, Daniel arrived, carrying his backpack and a pale look on his face. You got a message too, didn't you? He asked, his voice low. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? He pulled out his phone, showing her the screen. Same words, same threat. They know we were in that archive, he whispered. They're warning us to back off. Fear twisted inside her, but anger burned even hotter. So what? We just stop. Let them destroy my dad's life while we sit quiet. Daniel hesitated, torn. You don't get it. These people aren't just powerful, they're dangerous. If they're watching us, if they find out we copied those files, then we hold on tighter." She cut him off. Her eyes were fierce, defiant. "They want me to be afraid. I won't give them that satisfaction." That night, another warning came. This time, a note slipped under the front door. No words, just a photo of her father in his prison cell, circled in red ink. She froze, the paper shaking in her hands. Her mother found her moments later. "What's this?" Her mother gasped, snatching the photo. Her voice trembled with panic. "This is too dangerous. You have to stop before they hurt you." But the girl shook her head. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I can't stop, Mom. If I quit now, Dad loses everything. And if they're threatening me, it means I'm closer than they want me to be." Her mother turned away, unable to watch her daughter walk further into danger. In the days that followed, the threats escalated. Anonymous calls in the middle of the night. A black car, idling too long outside their home. Once, as she walked back from school, she felt the heavy presence of footsteps following her, only to see no one when she turned around. Daniel grew increasingly uneasy. "We should take this to the police," he urged. She looked at him bitterly. "The police arrested my father without proof. You really think they'll protect us now?" He had no answer. Still, she pressed forward. Late nights spent scanning files, cross-referencing dates, and piecing together a puzzle too carefully buried. Every discovery was a flicker of light. Every threat a darker shadow pressing in. One evening, she received a different kind of message. Not a warning, but a promise. "Next time, it won't just be your father we circle in red." Her blood ran cold. They were threatening her. She sank into her chair, clutching the phone, fear coursing through her veins. For a moment, she thought about giving up, about letting the fight go, about saving herself. But then she pictured her father, his tired smile, his weathered hands, the way he always told her she was his brightest star. And she remembered the moment in court when she had stood up and declared, "My father is innocent." She whispered to herself, voice trembling but resolute, "They'll have to break me before I stop." The storm was closing in, but she had already chosen her path. And with Daniel beside her, the battle for truth was only just beginning. Some truths are buried so deep that uncovering them feels like walking straight into the jaws of danger. The night was heavy with silence. As the girl stood outside the looming glass tower, her breath fogged in the cold air, and her hands clenched the strap of her backpack. Daniel shifted nervously beside her, his eyes darting toward the glowing cameras above the entrance. "This is insane," he whispered. "If security catches us, we'll be finished." She didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, low, determined. "If we don't do this, my dad stays behind bars forever. I won't let that happen." Daniel swallowed hard, then nodded. They slipped through a side entrance, using his badge. The click of the lock echoed louder than thunder in her chest. Inside, the building was a maze of glass walls and sterile light. Every footstep sounded like an alarm. They moved quickly, guided by memory and fear. Twice they ducked into empty conference rooms as the flashlights of patrolling guards swept by. Every second felt like a stolen breath, borrowed time. Finally, they reached the restricted archive. A heavy door, steel and unyielding. Daniel pulled a second card from his pocket. This might work. "But once we're inside, we'll be on camera. Then we don't waste a second," she replied. The scanner beeped green. The lock released. Inside, the air was colder, heavier, as if the room itself guarded its secrets. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into the shadows, and servers hummed softly in the back. She flicked on a small flashlight, sweeping the beam across the shelves. Labels marked accounts, transactions, contracts. Her pulse quickened. Somewhere in here was the truth. Daniel logged into a terminal, fingers shaking on the keyboard. "These files are encrypted, but look, see this. Transactions move through shell accounts. Signatures on contracts that don't match your dad's handwriting. Someone forged this." Her heart thudded. "Can you copy it?" "I'm trying." She moved deeper into the shelves, pulling down folders at random. Then she froze. One file was marked with her father's name. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were copies of checks, transfers, and contracts, all bearing his signature. But she knew that handwriting better than anyone. And these signatures, they weren't his. Her chest tightened with both fury and relief. "They framed him," she whispered. "It's all here. They forged everything." Just then, footsteps echoed outside the archive. The doorknob rattled. Daniel's eyes widened. "They're coming. Copy what you can," she hissed, shoving the forged documents into her backpack. The door cracked open, a beam of light piercing the darkness. They ducked behind a row of cabinets, holding their breath as two guards stepped inside. "Strange," one muttered. Door was unlocked. "Check the terminals," the other ordered. Daniel's computer still glowed. The guard approached. Thinking fast, the girl grabbed a loose file and hurled it toward the far corner. It landed with a thud. The guards spun, flashlights darting toward the noise. Over one barked. As they moved, she and Daniel slipped out the door, hearts hammering. They sprinted down the hall, ducking into a stairwell just as the guards' voices echoed behind them. By the time they stumbled into the cold night air, sweat clung to their skin. She clutched the backpack close, her breathing ragged but her spirit burning. Inside that bag was proof. Proof of her father's innocence. Proof of the company's corruption. Daniel bent over, catching his breath. We almost died in there. She looked at him, eyes fierce with determination. No, we almost lost the chance to save him. Now we have something they can't ignore. But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. Would the court believe her? Would evidence stolen in the dead of night hold weight against the polished lies of powerful men? She didn't know, but she knew one thing: she wasn't stopping now. And as the dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with fire, she whispered to herself, they wanted me to be silent. Instead, I'll make the whole world hear. The next battle would not be in the shadows. It would be in the courtroom. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with whispers and tension. Every creak of the benches, every shuffle of paper, seemed louder than it should have been. At the center of it all sat her fatherists, chained, eyes tired, but spirit unbroken. The girl sat just a few feet behind him, her hands gripping the edge of her seat so tightly her knuckles turned white. The prosecutor rose. Tall and sharp, his voice slicing through the silence like a blade. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we have here is not a misunderstanding. What we have is greed. Ruthless greed. He paced slowly, eyes scanning the jurors. This man, he said, pointing directly at her father, abused his position. He manipulated contracts, stole funds, and lined his pockets while others suffered. The evidence will show that he is not only guilty, but dangerously cunning. The words burned her ears. She wanted to stand, to shout, to tell them all about the files in her backpack, about the forged signatures, about the truth. But this wasn't her moment. Not yet. Her father sat still, jaw tight. The chains around his wrists clinked as he adjusted himself in the chair. His silence was heavy, dignified, but it made him look cold to those who didn't know him. The jury leaned in, absorbing every poisonous word the prosecutor spoke. Page after page of evidence was displayed. Contracts, checks, transactions, all forged. She knew it, but to the jury, it looked damning. Each document, each number, was another brick in the wall closing around her father. She could feel her chest tightening. They're burying him alive, she thought. The prosecutor slammed a folder shut for emphasis. This man lived a double life. He pretended to be honest, hard-working, even noble, but behind the curtain, he was nothing more than a thief in a suit. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some shook their heads, already convinced of guilt. She looked at their faces and saw judgment hardening in their eyes. Her father's lawyer finally stood, trying to object, but the damage was already done. Objection, Your Honor. The prosecutor is appealing to emotion rather than fact. The judge, stern and unreadable, simply raised a hand. Overruled. Continue. Her heart dropped. It felt like the whole system was tilted against them. She glanced at her father. For a brief second, he turned his head. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she saw it his quiet plea. Don't give up. Not now. But the prosecutor wasn't finished. He called witnesses, former colleagues, even old acquaintances. Each one painted her father as arrogant, careless, greedy. Lies rolled off their tongues like rehearsed lines, and the jury drank them in. One man testified. He told me once, money is all that matters. Family, loyalty, integrity, it's all worthless compared to power. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. But the jurors scribbled notes as if it were gospel. The girl's nails dug into her palms. Every false word was a dagger. Every nod from the jury, another turn of the blade. When the prosecutor finally rested his case, the room was buzzing with energy, whispers, and suspicion. He looked smug, certain of victory. Her father's lawyer stood again, ready to speak in defense. But the girl hardly heard him. Her mind raced back to the night in the archives, the stolen files. The forged documents she now carried in her bag. This is it, she thought. Without those, they'll destroy him. With them, maybe we stand a chance. But timing was everything. The evidence couldn't just be waved around. It had to be introduced properly, strategically. If not, the court would dismiss it as illegal, even irrelevant. Her stomach churned with fear and determination. She was holding the truth, but she was also holding fire. Mishandled, it could burn them all. As the defense began their counter-arguments, she leaned forward, whispering to herself, "Hold on, Dad, just hold on. The truth is coming." And with that thought, she knew this trial was about to explode into something no one could control. The courtroom was silent, heavy with the weight of accusation. The prosecutor's words still echoed in the air like poison, painting her father as a man of greed and betrayal. The jury looked convinced. The defense lawyer looked cornered, and her father's shoulders sagged beneath invisible chains. And then her voice cut through the silence. "Your Honor, I want to testify." Every head in the room turned. The gallery gasped. The prosecutor froze mid. Even her father spun around, eyes wide with disbelief. The judge narrowed his eyes, adjusting his glasses as he studied her. "You." His tone was incredulous. "Young lady, this is highly irregular." But she didn't falter. Her knees trembled beneath the wooden pew, but her voice carried a strength she didn't know she had. "Please, you've heard lies all day. Let me speak the truth. I can prove my father is innocent." For a moment, silence. Then murmurs swirled around the courtroom like storm winds. Some scoffed, others leaned in. The judge raised a hand for quiet. He sighed, clearly conflicted. You understand, this is under oath. If you lie, there will be consequences. She nodded. Steady. I'm not here to lie. I'm here to save my father. A beat passed. Then, with reluctant authority, the judge declared, very well. The court will hear her testimony. The courtroom erupted with whispers, shocked voices buzzing through the gallery. The bailiff stepped forward, guiding her toward the witness stand. She walked slowly, clutching her bag tightly, every step echoing like thunder in her ears. As she raised her hand and swore the oath, her father whispered hoarsely, no, baby, you don't have to do this. But she turned her head just enough for him to see her resolve. I do. She sat. The prosecutor smirked, clearly amused, expecting nothing more than a desperate plea. But when she opened her bag and pulled out a thick folder of documents, his smile faded. Tell the court your name, the defense lawyer prompted. She lifted her chin. My name is Amara Johnson, and I am the daughter of the man you're trying to destroy. A hush fell. Every word that followed was like a blade cutting through the lies. She held up the first document. This is a financial report, one that was never supposed to see daylight. It shows funds being transferred into accounts under someone else's name, not my father's. Accounts that belong to senior executives in the company. Gasps rose. The jury leaned forward. Even the judge's eyes sharpened. She laid another paper on the stand. And this is a contract my father supposedly signed. But look closer. The signature doesn't match. I had it compared to his real one. This was forged. The prosecutor leaped up, objecting loudly. Objection, Your Honor. This evidence is circumstantial at best. It hasn't been, but the judge silenced him with a sharp wave of his gavel. Sit down, counselor. The witness will continue. Her hands shook, but her voice grew stronger with every word. She told them how she'd gone into the archives, how she'd uncovered files hidden away, how she'd traced the trail of fraud not to her father but to the very people, pointing their fingers at him. While my father was at home with me, she said, her voice cracking, they were moving money, signing false contracts, and framing him for every last crime. He wasn't greedy. He wasn't ruthless. He was a scapegoat. Her father covered his face. Overcome with emotion, the prosecutor tried again, his voice rising with desperation. This is outrageous. She's just a child, spinning a story. She didn't look at him. She looked directly at the jury, her eyes burning. I may be young, but I'm not blind. I watched my father work day and night, sacrifice everything to provide for me. He taught me honesty, loyalty, and love. Does that sound like the man they're describing? Or does it sound like someone who was too good to trusting and got betrayed by the people he trusted most? A heavy silence followed. Even the gallery sat frozen, hanging on her every word. She pulled out the final documentalog of digital access records. And here's the proof. The accounts they claim my father controlled, he didn't even have clearance. These logins came from the offices of the executives themselves. I traced them. The timestamps matched their schedules. They used him as cover while they committed the crimes. The judge leaned forward, eyes wide. The jury exchanged looks, whispering, shocked by the mountain of evidence that contradicted everything they'd been told. The prosecutor was pale. Fumbling for words, she swallowed hard, then looked at her father. Her voice softened, trembling with emotion. My dad isn't perfect, but he is innocent, and I will not let him spend his life in prison for crimes he never committed. The silence that followed was electric. For the first time, the power in the room had shifted. The judge cleared his throat, visibly shaken. This changes everything. The court will need time to review this evidence. The bailiff collected the documents, handing them to the clerk. The jurors stared at the papers like they were holding fire. Her father raised his head, eyes glistening with tears, and mouthed the words, "Thank you." And as she sat back in the witness chair, her heart pounding, she knew she had turned the tide. But she also knew the battle wasn't over yet, because exposing the truth was only the beginning. Now they would have to fight to make sure it held. The air inside the courtroom was thick, so heavy, it felt like even breathing might shatter the fragile silence. All eyes were on the stack of documents now resting on the judge's desk, each page glowing with the weight of revelation. For a long, unbearable moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then the judge's voice, low and steady, broke through. These records, these signatures, this trail, it points not to the defendant, but to others within the company. A murmur rolled through the gallery like distant thunder. The prosecutor shot to his feet, his face pale, his composure cracking. Your Honor, this is absurd. These so-called documents could have been fabricated. She's a child, not an expert. We can't take this seriously. But the judge's gavel struck hard against the bench. Bang, enough. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, pinned the prosecutor in place. The evidence will speak for itself. The defense attorney, who had seemed beaten down for so many days, finally lifted his head. His voice carried new strength. Your Honor, the truth is here, in black and white. For weeks, this courtroom has been fed a lie. But today, thanks to this brave young woman, that lie has been torn apart. Gasps filled the air. Jurors whispered urgently among themselves. One even covered his mouth, eyes wide at the realization of what was unfolding. The prosecutor's voice cracked as he tried again. This doesn't erase the theft. Funds were still stolen, millions of dollars. Yes, the defense attorney shot back. But not by my client. These transfers traced directly to executives sitting at the very top of the company. Men who had power, access, and motive. And they dared to frame the man who trusted them most. The gallery erupted. Journalists scribbled furiously. A woman in the back shouted, "Is this true?" The judge slammed his gavel again, demanding order. But the truth was already flooding the room. Unstoppable. And then one final blow. The young intern, Amara's unexpected ally, stood. His voice trembled at first, but then steadied. "Your Honor, I worked in that office. I saw things. I was told to stay silent. But she's right. I saw the executives manipulating files, moving money under Mr. Johnson's name. I was too scared to speak then. I'm not scared now." The courtroom froze. His confession fell like lightning, striking through every shadow of doubt. The prosecutor collapsed into his chair, defeated, while the corrupt executives, once confident, once untouchable, shifted uncomfortably in the gallery. Eyes turned toward them. Whispers grew. And then, almost like a storm breaking, the bailiff stepped forward. "By order of this court," the judge said firmly, "those named in this evidence will be detained for further investigation." Gasps, shouts, the scrape of chairs. The executives protested, their voices shrill and desperate. But officers moved swiftly, handcuffing them in full view of the jury, the press, and the very man they tried to destroy. Amara's father sat motionless, tears welling in his eyes as the chains of accusation finally fell away. His daughter, his brave, relentless daughter, had turned the tide. The judge looked to the jury, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. "Members of the jury, with this evidence presented, there can be no doubt. The charges against the defendant collapse under the weight of truth. This court recognizes that Mr. Johnson is innocent." The words seemed to hang in the air, glowing, alive. And then silence, a silence so deep it felt eternal. Until, at last, the gallery erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Friends and strangers cheered. Some cried. Cameras flashed. The walls themselves seemed to tremble with disbelief and shock. But Amara heard none of it. She only heard her father's voice, breaking with emotion as he whispered, "You saved me." She ran to him, throwing her arms around his shoulders, holding on as if she would never let go again. He clung to her, sobbing openly, the weight of injustice finally lifting after so many painful months. And in that moment, though, the world outside reeled in disbelief. Inside that courtroom, one truth reigned supreme. The truth had been revealed. The fight was not yet finished, but for the first time, hope shone brighter than fear. And soon, the verdict itself would change everything. The gavel struck for the last time, but this time, it did not sound like judgment. It sounded like freedom. The case was closed. The father, once branded a criminal, was now declared an innocent man. For a moment, he sat frozen, as though his mind refused to believe the nightmare was finally over. Then his daughter reached for him, and suddenly, the dam inside him broke. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "You never gave up on me." Not for a second. Amara held him tightly, her small frame shaking with sobs. "I told you, Duddy. I told you I'd prove it." Their embrace drew the eyes of everyone in the courtroom. Even the stern judge softened, his gavel now resting silently on the bench. Lawyers, jurors, reporters, all bore witness to the raw power of a daughter's love. Outside the courthouse, the scene was just as powerful. Crowds had gathered, neighbors, co-workers, even those who once doubted him. They watched as the family stepped out into the sunlight, hand in hand. At first, there was silence, and then, someone stepped forward. It was Mrs. Turner, the old woman from across the street, who had once whispered cruel words about the father's supposed crimes. She looked down, ashamed. "We were wrong," she said quietly. "We turned our backs when you needed us most." "I'm sorry." Others followed. A neighbor who once avoided their home. A man from church who had doubted. One by one, they admitted their guilt, not for a crime of law, but for a crime of judgment. The father, still holding Amara's hand, looked at them with weary eyes. "I lost almost everything," he said, his voice heavy but steady. "But today, I see the one thing I never lost: my daughter's faith. And maybe that's worth more than all the rest." The crowd grew quiet, and then, slowly, they began to clap. It wasn't just applause, it was something deeper, an acknowledgement, a redemption. The mother, who had wrestled with doubt for so long, finally stepped closer. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I was scared. I didn't know what to believe. But you were right. Amara, you saw the truth when the rest of us couldn't." Amara turned to her mother, her voice breaking. "I wasn't brave all the time. I was scared too. But I knew, deep down, I knew Daddy could never do what they said." Mother and daughter embraced. The family circle finally whole again. As the sun began to set, the family walked together through the crowd, no longer bowed by shame but lifted by courage and vindication. Later that night, Amara sat by her bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street that once echoed with whispers. The stars above seemed brighter than before. Her voice, soft but resolute, filled the air like the closing of a story. They thought the truth could be buried. They thought lies could destroy us. But lies crumble when you face them. And truth will always rise. My father is innocent. And love gave me the strength to prove it. Her words lingered. Not just as a daughter's reflection, but as a message to anyone listening. That sometimes courage doesn't come from having no fear. It comes from standing up, even when fear tries to silence you. The story of a girl, her father, and their fight for justice was not just their own. It was a reminder for every listener that no matter how dark the trial, light will always break through when love refuses to give up. The family, once broken, was restored, and the world would never forget the day a young girl's bold cry changed everything.